I present to you my data analysis project. The whole purpose of this project is for me to essentially go through a data set, go through the cleanup process, go through the analysis, and essentially give myself an excuse to actually use Power BI and to actually learn some useful insights from a data set that comes very close to me, and that is on the concept of video game sales. And yeah, I hope people can take something away from this. I want to demonstrate that I like to do any project, as long as it's on something that's going to be fun for me, I'm all for it. So let's get on with it. All right. So before going ahead and doing the data analysis, I actually decided to go into the data set and see what we're actually working with. And based on the actual questions that I actually want to answer from the analysis project, there were definitely a few areas in this data set that I definitely need to clean up. For example, the year of release column was originally a text format. So essentially everything, all the cell values was essentially strings. And for my analysis, I ideally would like it to be whole numbers so I can do a bit of ordering, so I can see a bit of a historical graph. And that you would think will be, essentially converting the column from a text to a whole number. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case because there were some cell values that contained the string n/a. So all we need to do from there was replace that so all the cells that had n/a, replace it with a 0. Or 0 or null. And then once we do that, then essentially converting it from a text string to a whole number was very straightforward. And from looking at the other columns, there were other columns that had empty cell values. So I just wanted to just fill those up with like non-applicable. And that was valid in those situations because those columns, such as genre and name, those were strings or text formats. So inserting non-applicable in those empty cells is absolutely fine. And if we go to the right, we also notice that in the critic scores and the user scores, which I might need, it does certain values do have null values, which I think is actually perfectly fine in this case because null can be accepted in a column that has a float or decimal number. So I was absolutely fine with that. And I also changed the developer so that again we see no applicables here, which was before empty cell values. So I just wanted to do a bit of replacing there. And now from looking at the entire dataset for what it is, I feel a lot more confident in performing the analysis. And it's a very good exercise because it comes to show that there's always going to be like certain formatting issues in every dataset. Not every single dataset is going to be perfect. And that's why it's our responsibility to go through this cleanup process to make sure that we are happy with the values that we're working with the data we're working with, and that will make the analysis process a lot easier. And as we can see from doing all these processing, we can see all the steps here, which I pretty much labeled just so if I ever wanted to review this at a later stage, I pretty much have these steps so I can easily go into them and make those necessary changes. Now that we've done the formatting, we're now able to actually work on actually performing the actual data analysis, which I'm actually excited to do. So let's get right into it. So before we go into the data analysis part of this, I wanted to briefly explain the areas that I wanted to focus on. And those areas are the user ratings and the global sales, and see how these things changed over time. I have a theory that these metrics actually decrease over time, and that's actually from my perspective as someone who's played games in the early 2000s, even to playing it here and there to this day. And I can definitely see how the games in the early days were way more popular compared to the games released in these most recent years. And even though this is just from my perspective and this isn't backed up by data, I hope that the analysis and actually checking out the data would actually back up my points, but I'm always open to be proven wrong, always, because that's the whole purpose of doing analysis, to try out different things, to see if we can learn something new from these data sets. And I look forward to getting into it. Let's go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the report that I've created on Power BI to actually provide some insight on the global sales metric as well as the user ratings. So let's first start off with the global sales. And something that was really interesting to know is that the sales, the total global sales for games, the highest amount of global sales was actually 2008, which essentially means for the games that was released in 2008, the total global sales for those games was the highest. And that's astonishing to see 601 million. And that's insane. And I wanted to go further than that and see what were the actual platforms that actually contributed to this significant number. And from looking at the below graph, we could see that in 2008, the biggest contributor was in fact the Nintendo Wii, with a amount of sales of 158.6 million. And then I wanted to go even further than that to see what were the actual games that were released for the Wii in 2008. What were the actual significant games? Because I was someone who used Nintendo Wii back in 2008, so it'll be really interesting to see what were the games that accumulate the most sales for those that was released in 2008. So I really want to know more about this, which then goes on to the graph on the right, and we can see that this is the games. This is like the general sales. We have no filtering for the year date. I just want to see for the Nintendo Wii, what were the games that accumulate the most sales? And not surprisingly, we have games like Wii Sport, Mario Kart Wii, Wii Sports Resort, Wii Play. I mean, most of these games, from what I remember, I think it makes sense because there were bundles on the Wii that came with Wii Sports, and there was even bundles, which I actually got the bundle, which came with both Wii Sports and Mario Kart Wii, which I'm really thankful to get. But I now want to filter this out, as I wanted to filter this out because I want to focus on why, how come the Wii, or actually, what games actually contributed for the Wii, especially for games specifically that was released in 2008, which is why I created this widget to kind of filter down the year, which will filter out this graph and these two graphs also, but I want to pay attention slightly to this graph here. So I'm going to filter it. I can enter it, but I like to, play around with the scroll. So 2008. Here we are. Okay, cool. We've got Mario Kart Wii, Super Smash Bros. Two amazing games that I had, and you go further in, you can see a couple of other games that I am familiar with, but it's really interesting to see that these are the popular games which actually contribute significantly. In fact, what was the number? 35 million for Mario Kart Wii. That's absolutely insane. And it's really good to know, like, these are the games that, and you can see, like, if I remove this filter, Mario Kart Wii, Super Smash Bros., you can see that even if I remove the filter, you can see Mario Kart Wii, you can see Super Smash Bros. They're still there. They're still one of the greatest Wii games that accumulate the most global sales. So it just shows that 2008 was an absolute fantastic year. And even from just looking at the second graph, you can see that the games that was for the Wii platform, you can see it's increasing over time. Of course, we have fantastic games such as the 360, we got the PS3, but we also see a bit of a decrease when it comes to the other games, like other platforms, and that's presumably these platforms are essentially that have been released way earlier, and because of that, it's pretty much to the point where it's pretty much maturing. So if not too surprising if you ask me. And one of the things that I like about Power BI is that you also have the ability to modify your columns. And one thing that I want to quickly make a quick change on, just for the formatting purposes, if I ever decide to publish this, is to amend this column, which is fairly easy. All we need to do is click on the click on the graph and just click on double click here, and then voila, we can go ahead and modify it just like that. Nice, and now that looks way better. And at the top of the report, I also provided some key metrics for the total global sales for the Wii, 360 and PS3, just to see how these platforms compete with one another. And not surprisingly, the Xbox 360 comes out on top. But I'm very surprised that Nintendo Wii has a significantly lower, like by maybe more than a difference of 100 million compared to the PS3 and 360, which is absolutely insane. Especially the fact that in 2008, as we just explained, that the Nintendo Wii in the games that was released in 2008 was to accumulate, had the most sales. You can see that in 2008, the games for the Wii published in 2008 was significantly higher. But despite that, it's really fascinating to see that, you know, the Wii games, you know, the Wii sales, you know, actually, it didn't actually matter in the end. And in fact, what I would be interested about, I think I put a filter here. Yes, we did put a filter. So if I go ahead and do 2006, I would expect the Wii to go down while the 360 and the PS3 to slightly go up. Actually, let's have a look. Oh, okay. So let me go ahead and expand this real quick. Okay, so where is the Wii? By the way, this is actually just on the fly. Okay, so 2000. Oh, look at this. The Nintendo Wii went down hard, and you can see. And hey, look at this. Look at 360. 360 actually increased from, you know, from 2008, to like 2010. It's actually increased, and it's kind of gone decreased, but not as bad as the Nintendo Wii. Wow, this is amazing. And even the PS3. Where's PS3? A yellow. Yeah, so similar story with how it's kind of like increased from 2008 to 2010. And again, even if it decreased, again, this is when the newer consoles in 2013, such as the Xbox One and the PS4, have pretty much been released. But again, the decrease over the years isn't as bad as the decrease for the Nintendo Wii. I mean, this is really impressive stuff. I mean, that's really fascinating just to see. And I would love to know, why is that the case? I would love to, if I had more time, yeah, definitely delve into that. But it's just really fascinating just to see why that is the case. But it shows, again, you can play around with the filtering on Power BI. That's one thing I like about this. So, very nice. So that's essentially the sales part of it. Alright, so this is the part where we go through the rating analysis, and I want to just note for the sake of the video that I actually say user score and user rating interchangeably. Now, in the first graph, I wanted to see how the average user score kind of impact, you know, how that affected and how that changes with respect to the year of the release. And again, not surprisingly, we can see that ever since like 2006, we can see that these ratings actually, the average user score actually goes down over the years, which is really fascinating. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on 2006 because I believe the user score of 7.25 was actually because, from looking at the actual data, there was only a few games that actually had this data available for us to use. So there's only like a few games. And because those few games had a high score, we would expect the average user score to be significantly higher, which is why I mainly focused on 2008, because the data was a lot more data, a lot more games that was released that had a user score. So 6.95, seems a lot more reasonable. So then that's what I'm going to kind of refer to. And you see as it goes 2009, 2010, 11, we can see that this average score tends to decrease, which is really fascinating. And I wanted to see, is there a particular console that kind of contributed to this? So this is the graph on the right, which is, I'm going to quickly focus on this. Now, I want to note something really interesting, is that although, okay, so it is expected for consoles like the 360. So if I just focused on the 360, so if you can see for 360, which is green, you can see here you see how it decreases over time, and again that makes sense because the 360, the PS3, which is yellow, similar story. It's just those games, those consoles, sorry, have pretty much been it's pretty much maturing and more. And this is kind of the time when there's other competitors and there's going to be new consoles to be basically replacing these, and that's where the games being produced for these consoles are kind of decreasing, and you would imagine the quality to be affected by this. Again, I would love to have more data on this to kind of back this, but this is just from my experience and my insights as someone who's been playing games since throughout 2008, even to this day. But one thing that really struck me as fascinating is if I went and focused on the Xbox One, for example. There we go. The Xbox One was actually released so even though we see in 2013, even though we know that the sales was below 6, I'm not too concerned about that, just because the Xbox One and the PS4, which are the new consoles, those were essentially released in late 2013, I think November. So they essentially only had 1 month of games. So I'm going to consider that with a grain of salt. But what really fascinated me is that I would have expected it to increase over time. But one thing you notice is that it's kind of like a gradual increase. And even like in 2016, one thing that really struck me as odd is that in 2016, for example, its user rating average for games that was released in 2016 for the Xbox One is only 6.6, whereas the highest for Xbox One is 6.74, but if you look at the 360, its highest was in fact 7.05, and I thought to myself, that's really fascinating. I'm thinking the highest average user rating for a particular year for the Xbox 360 is way higher compared to a new console such as the Xbox One. Its highest average rating for games in this particular year is only 6.74, which is again 0.3 of a difference. And that's really fascinating because I would have thought the new consoles, and when I say new consoles, considering we now have games like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, the data, I believe this goes as late as 2016. So that's what I'm saying. So when I say new, it's not technically new, but it's still relevant, if that makes sense. There is still like a massive user base for these consoles. But it's really fascinating to see that I would have thought the Xbox One, because it's a new game, new games, for the Xbox One platform, I would have expected the average user rating to actually increase and either do better, if not higher, than the Xbox 360. But according to the data here from 2016 anyway, it didn't. And this is essentially 2 to 3 years of the Xbox One game development, for game companies to be creating these games. It's really fascinating to see, this how the Xbox 360 just kicks ass, when it comes to the user score, which is fascinating. And I wanted to take that a little further and actually see, if I go back to the report, I essentially created, I created 2 more graphs to kind of show the breakdown for the average user score for games that was released on the Xbox 360 in 2008, and I'm basically breaking it down by genre. I'm basically comparing that to the user score, the similar thing on the right, but this is for games that was released in 2016 for the Xbox One. And I wanted to see, what's the key difference in terms of genre? Because I thought, is it possible that the Xbox One games, the reason why the average user rating for the Xbox One games isn't, is it because of the genres? That was my theory, and I wanted to find out. But one thing that was really fascinating is that comparing these 2 graphs, one thing that really struck me is that even though there were genres for the Xbox One that had really high ratings, there were like plenty that had You got 8.10, 8, 7. That's really high compared to the Xbox 360 games in 2008. It really had its highest was 7.77. And I'm thinking, okay, then if it has high ratings here, how did it go so pear-shaped? And then this is when, if you're looking at 6.5, you can see its lowest for the Xbox 360 is only 6.3, which isn't that bad. But if you look at the Xbox One for 2016, you could see there's a couple that goes below, a couple of genres that goes below 6.3, and its lowest is a 4.87, and that accumulates 6.47%. And that actually explains why average for the average user rating for the Xbox One is significantly lower, is because these genres, and this is platform games, you got sports, these Xbox One, they're not really getting much of a good hit. They're not really hitting well to the user community. So if I was someone who was presenting this back in like 2016 or 2017, I would try and make the point. I'm thinking the genre does technically have a bit of a difference, because look, if you observe for 360, we can see that the platform and even the sports, they didn't do too bad in terms of the user score. But if you compare that to the Xbox One, something isn't right here. And it could be down to the platform, but from just looking at the data, we can see that the genres here isn't getting a good rating. But the fact that I've never seen something that has 4.87, its lowest for 360 again, 6.31 only, which is astonishing. Not even 5. Not even a rating of 5, which is really interesting stuff. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up the analysis section. I wanted to end the video talking about the things that I've learned from the analysis process, and even just from doing this actual project. So one of the things that I've actually learned was understanding a bit more about how to use the load and transform part in Power BI, because especially if you have certain rows that may have invalid data or may have values that's not necessarily what you need for the analysis. Stuff like Power BI, or you can even use like some process to basically clean up your data. But Power BI kind of provides a good, nice way to clean up the data and get it in a position where you're actually ready to perform the analysis. And it was good to have that challenge rather than just going straight into the analysis, because I would imagine that that's not the typical day-to-day process for a data analyst. They would expect to clean the data, then do the analysis. And after doing that, when I was going into the actual data just to see what I was working with, I then had a series of questions I wanted to answer, because I think it's very important to have an objective of what you want to gain from what you want to gain from the analysis process, because you can easily get yourself into a massive hole if you don't have clear objectives, which is why I said previously I wanted to focus on the user ratings and the global sales metrics. And when it came to the actual analysis, I learned how the global sales was significantly higher for games that was released in 2008, and how the biggest contributor in terms of platform wise was the games for the Nintendo Wii, and such games included my favorite Mario Kart Wii, as well as Super Smash Bros. And a couple of other really very successful games. And it was really fascinating to even just observe, just on the fly, how the Nintendo Wii total global sales was significantly lower compared to the total global sales for the PS3 and the Xbox 360, because most of these consoles were kind of around the same time. So it was really fascinating. And when it came down to actually looking at the actual data, it was so fascinating just to see the biggest drop, the steepest drop with respect to the global sales for the Nintendo Wii. And I saw that big drop from like 2008 all the way to like 2013. But that drop, that decrease of, I mean, you would expect the the global sales to potentially go down as new consoles are essentially released to the market, but I wouldn't expect the decrease to be that low. And when we compared it to the 360 and the PS3, we saw that the global sales did decrease for games over the years, but not as steep as the Nintendo Wii, which did explain why there was a massive difference, but I'm pretty sure by like 100 millions, which is insane, really insane. When it came to the user rating metrics, one thing that I learned, and I think this actually proved, was that yes, it is true that the user rating, the average user rating, did in fact decrease over the years, and it did decrease from 2008 all the way to 2016, and it's kind of expected. When I was looking at the breakdown according to platforms, I would expect that for the consoles that's already been in the market for a while, such as the Nintendo Wii, Xbox 360, PS3, DS, we would expect these things to decrease because they've pretty much been in the market. But one thing that did struck out to me was the newer consoles that were released later in the cycle, essentially focusing on 2013, the Xbox One and the PS4. But one thing that really struck out to me was the average the average user rating for the highest year. So I think for Xbox One, according to the data, I believe was either 2016 or 2014. Its highest didn't even come close to the average user rating for its predecessor in 2008, aka the 360. The Xbox 360 user ratings for games that was again created for the 360, it was way higher, and I wanted to know why was that. So when I broke it down even further according to genres, it was clear to me that there was, even though the Xbox One had like significantly higher user ratings for certain genres, but there were also other genres for the Xbox One that had really low ratings, as low as 5, which is really insane, comparing that to the Xbox 360 genre breakdown for games released in 2008. So it was really nice to kind of go through this process and just to kind of dig in and understand why is that. And I really did enjoy going through this exercise and to get the opportunity to actually have fun and actually learn a bit more about video game sales, and again to kind of better myself in Microsoft Power BI. And yeah, I'm going to conclude this video. I hope people took something away from this, and until next time, I'll see you in the next demo. Thank you.